I'm Scott the Floor Guy, and this is For Your Information Flooring, where I will do my best to provide viewers with some basic information regarding the field of wood floors, more specifically the sanding of flooring. Now, since this is a one-time show, and because just like with anything, to provide detailed information concerning any one subject would take a lot more than a half-hour show. That would perhaps be something more in the lines of a series. But even with such a short time, we will do our level best to do at least skim the surface of showing you some of the equipment used in the process, get you familiarized with the steps, and explain the basics of the sanding process. We are doing this to provide anyone that is interested in sanding their wood floors with an overview of how it is done. Because it is a process that is very entailed and it does take a certain amount of skill and endurance, we strongly suggest that you reach out to a professional in the field to have your wood floors refinished. And later we will give you some pointers on what to look for and what questions to ask the company you will choose to go with to make sure you are getting the best job possible. However, should you choose to sand your floors yourself, this program will get you started on your path of research and show you some brief examples on how it's done. Wood floors are a beautiful addition to any home, and not only are they always in style and look great, they also add to the value of a home, which is always nice, right? I myself have been in the flooring business for roughly 15 years, and I will share with you what the correct process for getting the best look from either your existing wood floor or your newly installed wood floors. Again, because we'll go over the sanding and first coat process, because if we went to all the aspects such as ripping up your old flooring, installing your new flooring, and then sanding your floors, well, we would be here for a very long time. So, for now, join me in watching the beginner's information guide, if you will, on sanding wood floors. These are the main tools that I use in my arsenal of equipment when sanding and refinishing floors. We'll start work my left to right. This is a Hummel. It's the 8-inch drum belt. And how this works is it will do the entire floor up to within 4 inches of the edges of the walls. And it's usually a 3 or 4 cut system depending on how old the varnish is on the floor. If you've got a 120-year-old varnish and you're sanding it, you got to do a 4 cut, which means start out with a 16 grit, move to a 36, and then a 50, and then finish cut with an 80. Okay, this machine here is called a Lagler Hummel. It was invented apparently by a guy named Eugen Lagler. A Belgian, German guy, I don't know. I've seen pictures of him and he's just a big, burly dude. And this particular machine has been in service for years. It's basically been the standard machine. The machine of choice for professionals everywhere. We have one just because somebody was selling it that day and we just happened to be there. So we were lucky enough to get this. Got it for a steal too. Price range for these, brand new, are about $5,500. Used, maybe you can, if you're lucky, you can get one for like $2,500 to $3,000. You don't want to pay any less than that because that means you're possibly getting a machine that has problems. And I swear to you, I would rather suggest you buy a new machine as opposed to buying a used one, because with a used one you don't know what you're getting. And every time you take it in the shop, it's at least a $100 bill. Between $100 and $1,000, just to walk in the door with it and say, "Can you fix my machine?" And you don't want to be spending that kind of money, So this is a 5 horsepower motor, and it spins, I'd say, at about 6,000 RPM. Educated guess, I haven't really researched it. And we've got 3 wheels here. Some machines have 4. I actually prefer a 4-wheel machine as opposed to a 3-wheel. This also has a dust collecting system, as you can see here. It's not advanced like the Edger, where it's got a 2-stage vac. It actually has a turbine, like a turbocharger, deep inside the chassis that's run by a fan belt, and it spins at a really high rate of speed, and it collects the dust into this bag. This is more like 80–85% dust free. It's really not all that efficient when it comes to dust collection. But it's about as good as you can get, with a floor sander. I mean, right off the bat, don't expect, when you hire a floor sanding company, or if you're doing the floor yourself, get the word dust free out of your head. I can't stress that enough. It's an impossibility. You're sanding wood, That's just one of the, I don't know, well, how should I say that? It's one of the pitfalls that come along with the job. It's dust, you gotta live with it. Okay, and also there's a lever system here that adjusts the settings of how deep the sandpaper cuts into the floor. For some reason, I've never had to use the lowest setting, which is the most aggressive setting. I've always kept it here, or when I'm using a new belt, like let's say like a rough cutting belt, I'll stick something in here to make this even higher so that it doesn't cut too aggressively. Because if you cut too aggressively with the floor, especially on a rough cut, you'll create clumps that come out underneath, and if the wheel hits it, that's another way to get chatter on your floor. All these little things, that take years and years of practice, and knowledge and training that you can't learn in one day and expect to sand your floor and think that it's going to turn out looking like a professional does it. All right, I just want to bring up a few things about this particular machine. It's run on 220 volts. It's a 5 horsepower motor. It's got a lot of power. And when you're behind it and you're holding it, it wants to take you for a ride. If you let go of this thing, it'll probably do 25–30 miles an hour and go right through a wall. So just to give you a pretty good idea as to what this thing's capable of doing. Its dry weight to begin with is probably about 250 pounds. So it's like me trying to pull a defensive linebacker, with a rope as he's trying to run in the opposite direction. And do that for 8 hours a day. It's a lot of fun. Okay, now as far as changing out a belt, the first time I did this, it took me like 20 minutes. It's one of those things where, if you take a mirror and you try and walk backwards, you suck at it the first time, but you practice at it enough and you get good, and it's just like, it's one of those things where if you do it enough times, it's like second nature. So, I'll be able to. Okay, now most of these machines have levers, pull up, has the belt exposed. You just wing it, pull it out. That's what it looks like. It's an 8-inch belt. I'm putting one on. What I like to do is have the numbers facing upright so that I know which direction it was put in. Some people like to switch them around because the drum itself is at a slight camber and it digs in on one side more than the other when you're doing your passes. And some people will think they can save on belts and spin it around and put it back in, but I don't recommend that because that's how you get chatter on the floor, because the belt has been used on one side for so long, it begins to pull itself apart a little bit, so that if you go to turn it around, it's still got all that extra pull on one side and it's tight on the other, and it's going to want to flap back and forth, and that's what causes chatter. Chatter is that look you get on the floor when the light glares in, from outside. You can see like these weird marks that look like repetitive, swatches. And that can be from a multitude of things that cause that. What I just said is one of the reasons why. Another reason why you get chatter is because the wheels are dirty. Sometimes a staple or a nail will get stuck on it, and as you push the machine, it'll go up on the nail and leave an indentation in the floor and cause an effect that just continues on every time you go over that specific area. So you always want to check the wheels. Another reason why you get chatter too is that what's good about this floor here, it's a great example, it's red oak. A lot of red oak has an open and closed grain. The open grain is much softer, and like on this specific piece, I don't know if you can see that, it's got a lot of exposed grain, and when a wheel rolls over that grain, the closed grain is a lot higher than the exposed grain. So when the wheel rolls over it, it'll do this. And that within itself can cause chatter as well. Okay, and pull the cover off. Little lever right there. Get that out of there. Take said belt. Numbers facing in the right direction. Center it underneath the drum. Pinch in a little bit on the top. Slide it over the roller. Push it in. Flip the lever. And what I'd like to do for extra measure is blow inside there as I'm turning the drum, because a lot of residual dust, you know, fills up inside there, and you have, as soon as that lever gets pulled, sometimes that dust will fall into the drum. And then when the machine turns on, if you've got a little piece of dust like this, you know, rolling around inside that drum, that too can create chatter. All right, now we're going to show you how the lever system works when doing a cut on the floor. I'll just pretend the machine's on. Okay, and I'm sitting here, I'm ready to cut my path. The last thing you want to do when starting out is lower this lever while the machine isn't moving. That is strict no-no. You're going to cut a deep cavity in your floor. I don't know if you've ever seen do-it-yourself jobs, but I've seen my fair share where I'm seeing deep chasms going in all kinds of directions as though they were lost in a Bermuda Triangle. You know, they didn't know where they're at. You know, there's a specific way you got to go about using this lever. You have to cut with the grain of the wood. Very important things to stress. But so when you're starting out with a lever, you want to push off slightly. You know, not too fast, not too slow, but just at a nice, comfortable pace, and then slowly drop the lever on the floor. And the machine's going to want to take you for a ride, like I said. And you just walk at a nice, steady, normal pace. I'm sure somewhere in the video series here it's going to show me cutting the floor back and forth, so you'll be able to see the speed that, in which I do it. Okay, what we have here is the next piece of equipment, this shiny aluminum edger made by Alto. It takes a 7-inch disc. It's very similar to this machine where it does a lot of the heavy duty work for you. It's very heavy, approximately 20 pounds, 15, 20 pounds. And it spins at about between 10 and 12,000 RPM. It's not for the beginner. Actually, none of this equipment really is. But only what I recommend only well-trained individuals use this equipment. So the way this works is that it will go around the edges of the walls where the big machine can't reach, and it will clean up all the staining, all the finish off the floor. And I believe they do start out with a 12 grit paper for this, for real tough finishes that are on the floors. And then it probably goes all the way up to 120, 150, I'm not sure. I've never used anything more than 120 with this particular machine. And there's this rule of thumb where if you're staining a floor, you don't want to sand your floor higher than 100 grit, because the higher the grit and the smoother the floor is, the more difficult it is for the stain to adhere deeply into the wood and create that rich darkness that people like to see, you know, that Pier 1 look with a coffee color. So that's why I like to stay between 80 and 100 grit. When using this machine, it's very important to have this disc centered almost perfectly underneath. You don't want to have a altered orbital effect going on that will cause the disc to run into the shoe molding and create like a little bead and dig into it. It's very sloppy, and I usually inform customers ahead of time. You know, give them the option of either removing the shoe molding and sanding under it, and then give them the option of either having me remove the shoe molding and sand under it and then replace it, or just sand up to it. There's pros and cons to both, because a lot of times you can't remove shoe molding because there's 40 layers of lead paint, and you know, it's most, and if it's white or painted, it's most likely pine and 75 to 80 years old, and there's no moisture content whatsoever, so it cracks just by looking at it. So most of the time you want to leave it on, but you want to tell customers as much as possible, inform them as much as you can about the process, just so that in the end, after the job's done, they're not asking you, hey, why are all these marks on my shoe molding? Then what are you going to do? You're going to have to be obligated to either replace it or make up some kind of story. Okay, so getting back to centering this disc, I don't know, everybody's got their own way of doing it. I just like to spin it at random until it looks like it's spinning perfectly in a circle. Give it a couple knots like that for good luck. Tighten this sucker as hard as I can. It's got a nice little handy latch there, so you don't lose that thing, because that's like car keys, you turn your head for a minute, it's gone, but fortunately they got a little thing on there to hold that. Okay, this particular edger right here is set up for a two-stage vacuum. It's got an adapter put on here, so all you need to do is just plug the hose in and you're good to go. It gets most of the dust, it doesn't get it all, but it gets enough to where I don't need to use a mask when I'm using it, so that's about as good as you can get. So I'm going to plug it in and I'm going to turn on the back, so you'll watch how I basically move from left to right across the wall. The big floor sander comes about 4 inches from the wall. It hits on the baseboard, but the drum, won't get more than 3 to 4 inches to the edge of the wall. So this machine goes right up to the shoe molding and can go back as far as you want, basically. But you don't, on your first cut with the edger, you don't want to go back too far. You want to start out maybe 6 inches with a rough grit, and then come out about 7 inches or 8 inches with the mid cut, and then about 10 inches to a foot with the fine cut. So I'm going to plug this thing in now and you can see how I do it. Basically, I like to start out going against the shoe molding and then coming back to the starting point and then going in like a very, very tight zigzag fashion. It's important to let the machine do the work. You're just there to hold it and make sure it goes where it's supposed to. It doesn't necessarily really require any kind of physical pressure. You just need to hold it, and that's all you need to do. Now, over here, we'll be sanding this area. It's about 2 feet by about 4 feet, and there's a cabinet coming out over here. So the big floor sander can't fit in this area, so we have to do that entire section with the edger. Before we start here are the corners. It's very important that in the early stages of sanding, you do not dig into the corners. The further you dig in, the harder it's going to be for you to hand scrape them. So when you're starting out with your rough grit of sandpaper, you want to approach the corners and leave yourself a lot of room. And then for the second cut, the mid cut, you would get a little bit closer. And then with the final cut, you would get as close as you can to the wall without digging in too far. And this machine here, bizarre looking device, 1950s medical contraption of sorts, is called a duckbill radiator edger, for obvious reasons. It's more like a clown's shoe, but whatever you want to call it. This takes a disc as well, works in a similar fashion as this, and what this does is it gets under cabinets, it gets under refrigerators, it gets under radiators, those old steam radiators from Victorian homes. It does all that work for you. All that work that before these things were invented, it was all hand scraping. And I always wish that on anybody. So this is a great tool, it's my best friend. We hang out all the time. All right, and this R2-D2 looking thing, I'm sure it was the influence of George Lucas, from Star Wars, R2-D2. It looks a lot like it, and we actually do call it the R2 unit. It's a 2-stage vac. Each motor has 650 CFMs of suction, which is a lot. And what we have here now is the buffer. It's the final tool that you need before the process of coating and that end result you want to get for your floor, so you can put your furniture back in and get back to your normal life. When you're at the point where you're ready to finish the floor, I think the best product, in my opinion, is a product called Emulsion Pro. And it's very cost effective, it's not expensive, and in my opinion, it's just as durable as any oil-based finish, as any catalyzed, ceramic fortified, water-based finish that's out there. Some water-based finishes, catalyzed water-based finishes can be anywhere up to like $300-400 for a gallon. And I would put this up against it any day, where it's like $45. But you can't buy this at Home Depot. You have to get it through our supplier. Always roll your finish. Never shake. So here's how it's done. You always work with the grain, left and right fashion. You're pouring your finish out, just pour a little bit at a time. Don't go all the way to the end of the wall, because you'll just make a big mess. So you want to just not put too much pressure down, but just enough to where you can feel it putting some pressure down on the floor. Per gallon, it varies. With red oak, you probably get about 400 to 450 square feet per gallon, because red oak has an open and closed grain. Hello, and welcome back to Short Attention Span Theater. If you made it this far, you deserve an award. I hope that was a good understanding on the basic process of sanding your wood flooring. Of course, there are different types of woods in flooring, and each one has certain small details which must be addressed, and as mentioned before, that would take much more time to explain. As for when choosing a company to do your flooring, make sure you do your homework on each company. Look into, and of course always try to get at least 3 estimates. The old belief that you should go with the company priced in the middle is not always the best way to go. Go with the company which knows the most and feels to be the most informative to you when you speak to them. Ask how long they've been in business. Of course, make sure they are insured and bonded so that you may protect yourself should anything go wrong. Ask to see pictures of past work which they have done. And of course, always check for references. You can always use references such as online sources, but I believe it is better to ask for references from prior clients of the company. Well, I hope this short tutorial and explanation will deem useful to you in your path to a beautiful hardwood floor. And again, we do not recommend that you do this as a DIY project, but if you do, this program should at least give you an understanding on what to do and what to look for. If you do choose to go it on your own, good luck, and before you go for it, start in a closet or a more hidden area so that you can get a little practice in. Thank you for joining me today on For Your Information Flooring. I was happy to share with you these tips on wood floor sanding techniques. Good luck on your project, be careful, and have a good time. For DIY Flooring, I'm Scott Barrett. Have a great one. So long.